Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
The Thunder Demon Straw Hat Luffy by AaronTaichou. This is a story where Luffy ate the Rumble fruit, a logia-class devil fruit, and became a lightning man instead of a rubber man. Luffy also showed signs of haki at a young age, so Shanks decided to take him with them to train Luffy. Godlike Luffy. More serious/smart Luffy, who acts more like a captain, and quote-unquote, I don't own anything. Adios.
Chapter 28. The Navy responds in training. The sun was up bright in the sky over the country of Alabasta. The citizens of the country were all still at work trying to rebuild all the broken buildings that were damaged in a war. All their work, however, were interrupted by a flock of nuku flying across the country carrying a bunch of freshly printed newspaper. The flock of bird then dumped all the newspaper at once over the country, causing everyone to drop what they were doing and rush to grab one of the falling papers. They were all rushing because it was common for people to pay for the newspaper if they wanted one, but only on the rare occasion where something that may affect the entire world has happened. Then the news crew will deliver to the grand public in large quantities for free. Everyone grabbed the paper and immediately looked front page. What they saw caused their eyes to bulge out of their head in shock. Around the world, people were having similar reactions to what they were seeing in the newspaper. At the docks of Alubarna were a few navy ships docked there, along with a large pirate ship with a crocodile figurehead. The Ney confiscated crocodile's ship and were going to tow it back to Navy HQ. On one of the Navy ships was the Marine captain who tried to stop Luffy from entering the Grand Line, Smoker. He was sitting on the deck watching his Marines restock the ship. Standing behind him was another Navy captain, a female captain with pink hair. She was the infamous Black Cage, Hina, the leader of the Black Cage Corp. Straw Hat sure is causing a stir in the world, she said as she lit a cigarette. Yeah, well, that interview he did must have pissed off a lot of high-ranking people in the government, Smoker replied as he blew out a puff of smoke. That he did, Hina impressed, she said as he walked forward and stood beside Smoker. What are your orders? Smoker asked as he looked up at Hina. They told Hina to stand down, she said in a frustrated tone, causing Smoker to raise an eyebrow. Hina upset, she added. Yeah, I figured as much, Smoker said as he breathes out a large amount of smoke. They're probably going to offer him a warlord position, he added. They were, Hina said, confusing him. What do you mean were? Smoker said as he turned and looked at her. What change? He asked. Didn't you read this morning's paper? Hina asked, causing Smoker to shake his head. Hina disappointed, she said with a sigh before walking over to the side of the ship and yelling down at some Marines. You there? She yelled at a random Marine. Get Hina today's paper, now. She yelled, causing the Marine to salute and run off to get a copy of the paper. Why can't you just tell me? Smoker asked as he was growing impatient. Hina doesn't want to spoil it for you, she said as she looked behind her and saw the Marine running towards them with a newspaper in his hand. Here you go, Captain, the Marine said as he handed the paper to Hina, who then handed it to Smoker. When Smoker got the paper and saw the headline on the front page, his eyes nearly popped out of his skull. There on the paper were two large pictures of Luffy and Shanks side by side just under the headline that read, The Thunder Demon Straw Hat Luffy and red-haired Shanks formed an alliance. What the hell? Smoker shouted out. Hina told you, Hina said as she took a puff of her cigarette. The Navy intercepted a call between the two last night, and during the call, they heard Red Hair offer an alliance between himself and the Thunder Demon. Hina nervous, she said as she watched as Smoker read through the article. You said Red Hair initiated the call and the alliance? He said, putting emphasis on the and. Yeah, it took everyone by surprise when he of all people decided to ally up with someone. He is the only one of the four emperors who doesn't have a fleet behind him and is usually the most peaceful of the four, Hina said as she walked over and sat down on a nearby chair. So, this is why the government didn't bother sending him the invitation to the warlords, Smoker stated as he continued to read through the article. His bounty is going to go through the roof now, he added. It was originally only supposed to go up by 50 million, Hina said, getting Smoker's attention. What changed? He asked in a confused tone. It's there in the article, Hina said as she pointed to the paper. It was the one thing that scared the government more than the alliance itself, she said as Smoker continued to stare at her, waiting for her to tell him rather than him reading about it. During the call, Red Hair said that it was not an alliance between superior and subordinate, but an alliance between equals, she said, surprising Smoker even more when he heard equals. This is going to cause an imbalance in the three powers, Smoker said as she closed the paper and stood up. That is what the Navy and the government fear. They are worried that the other emperors will begin to act thinking that Red Hair is trying something, Hina said. But I don't get it. Why did they tell you to stand down if he isn't going to join the warlords? Smoker asked as he turned around and looked at Hina. The pink-haired Marine captain remained silent for a while before she spoke in a low voice. 10 vice admirals are on their way, she said, causing Smoker's eyes to widen. Before Smoker could reply to what Hina just said, Toshigi, who had had last part of Smoker and Hina's conversation, spoke up. 10 vice admirals, but that means, she said, getting their attention. That's right, Hina said in a low tone. A buster call is on its way, and its target is Straw Hat Luffy, she said before everyone who had been within hearing distance went quiet. None of them ever witnessed a buster call in person, but they have all heard stories. It is said that the buster call is the ultimate form of military attack used by the Marines. It is a result of the Marine doctrine of absolute justice. The target of a buster call is usually to destroy anything from a criminal or group of criminals to an entire island that has proven to be extremely dangerous to the world government. Who ordered it? Smoker asked while looking at Hina. She took a drag of her cigarette and exhaled the smoke before she replied. The buster call was ordered by Admiral Akainu, she said, causing everyone's eyes to widen while Smoker narrowed his. Smoker was not all that fond of Akainu and his ways of doing things. He believed that a person should be judged fairly in regard to the law. If someone broke the law, they should be punished and only them. Innocent people who did no wrong should not have to perish so justice can be achieved. But sadly, that was not the way Akainu did things. He was a man who believed if you broke the law, you and all those affiliated with you are to be punished regardless if they did anything wrong or not. What is it you need, Toshigi? Smoker asked, knocking everyone out of their thought. Oh right, Toshigi said as she shook her head. These just arrived, she handed 2 wanted posters to her captain. It is the new wanted posters of the Straw Hats, she added as Smoker took the wanted posters from her. Smoker looked at the poster and bit down on his cigars in frustration. The first poster was Zoro's wanted poster. The picture they used for Zoro was him just after he defeated Mr. 1. He was standing tall with blood dripping from his head while sheathing 2 of his swords. He had a cold look on his face as he was looking just a bit to the right of where the camera was. Behind Zoro was multiple destroyed buildings along with the body of Mr. on a pool of blood. Wanted, dead or alive. Roronoa Zoro moniker, the pirate hunter. Bounty, $80 million. Smoker then looked at the second wanted poster. It was Luffy's. It was the exact same poster from before, the only thing that changed was his bounty. Wanted, dead or alive. Monkey D. Luffy moniker, the Thunder Demon, Straw Hat Luffy. Bounty, $200 million. Captain Smoker, Toshigi said, getting the Marine. Look over there, she said while pointing at a flagpole that was by the docks. When Smoker and Hina looked over, they saw 2 royal guards attaching a black flag to a flagpole, getting ready to raise it. When they finished attaching the flag, they began raising it. All the Marines on the docks along with a few citizens who were passing by stopped what they were doing and looked at the flag that was being raised. When the flag was at the top of the flagpole and the wind hit it, everyone present could see just what flag it was. It was the flag of the Straw Hat Pirates. Well, I'll be damned, Smoker said as he stared at the flag. He did say that this country was now his territory, Toshigi said as she stared at the flag. It is happening all around us, Hina said as she looked around and saw multiple flags with the Straw Hat symbol on it flying on multiple buildings. It doesn't matter, Smoker said as he placed the 2 wanted posters down. After today's Straw Hat Luffy will no longer exist, he said as he sat back down. Before anyone could reply to what he said, a random Marine came running towards them while carrying a transponder snail. Captain Smoker, the Marines yelled, getting everyone's attention. What is it? Smoker asked in a slightly annoyed voice. It is Navy HQ, they wish to speak to you, he said as he held the snail closer towards Smoker. With Luffy Luffy and the crew were on the bank of the Sandora River loading supplies onto the ship while the king and Vivi along with a few royal guards. They had left the palace early this morning before the sun was up. Luffy brought everyone over on his Thundercloud along with a few members of the Supersonic Duck Squad to take the king and the princess back to the palace. Luffy was currently standing beside the king looking on as Zoro, Usopp, and Sanji loaded the supplies onto the ship. Nami and Najiko were off to Luffy's right saying their goodbyes to Vivi while Robin was standing behind Luffy with Chopper standing next to her. It is a shame that you guys couldn't stay for Vivi's coming of age ceremony, the king said as he looked over at Luffy. It's like I said last night, the government won't just sit back and let the alliance between Shanks and me stand. They will try and break it up early before it truly picks up steam, Luffy said with a sigh as he began remembering the previous night. Flashback to the alliance. Both said at the same time before tossing back their drinks. What just happened? Nami asked out loud as she stared at the transponder snail Luffy was holding in his hand. I think we just formed an alliance with one of the 4 emperors, Usopp replied in a disbelieving tone. Everyone else in EH room was beyond stunned at what was happening. Robin was probably the most surprised out of everyone there. She had only been a part of the crew for a few days, and in those days that she had been there, Luffy defeated a warlord, claimed an entire nation as his territory, and now formed an alliance with one of the 4 emperors. It was a bizarre few days for her. The red-haired pirates, on the other hand, were having a party on the other end of the line when the two captains sealed the deal. There were sounds of beer jugs hitting a wooden table along with shouts and cheers about their little Luffy all grown up. "So, what does this alliance grant me?" Luffy asked as he ignored the astonished looks he was getting from his crew and the loud cheering coming from Shanks' crew. "Oh, you know, the usual," Shanks said casually, causing everyone to sweat drop as his laid-back behavior. "All the territories under my protection are now to a greater extent under your protection as well, meaning you reap the same benefits I do from them," Shanks said, causing Luffy to nod while he refilled his glass with whiskey. "And I take it the same goes for my territories?" he asked. "Yeah," Shanks replied. "Oi Ben. Bring me more sake," Shanks shouted, causing Luffy to chuckle and shake his head. "But the most important one out of all of them is the fact that if anyone messes with you, they mess with me," he added in a serious and somehow sober voice. "That goes both ways," Luffy said in a low tone. "Where are you headed next?" Shanks asked. "Don't know," Luffy replied with a shrug. "Don't really care, to be quite honest. I go where the log post points for me to go," he said in a carefree manner. "That's the spirit," Shanks said with a laugh as everyone there heard him slam a jug down. "By the way, that thing that you wanted me to look out for on the black market showed up," Shanks said, getting Luffy to perk up. "Perfect, we are about 2 islands from Water 7, Luffy said, earning his crew's attention. "Alright, give me a call if you need anything," Shanks said. "And you give me a call if you need anything," Luffy replied. "I will need your help soon," Shanks replied, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow in curiosity. "But that is a conversation for the other line," he said, letting Luffy know that he should expect a call from him on a more secure line. "I'll talk to you soon then," Luffy said. "Yeah, take care of yourself, Lou," Shanks replied. "You too, and say hello to the guys for me," Luffy said with a smile. "Will do," Shanks replied before the line was cut off. Luffy put the snail back into his coat before he resumed eating his food without a care in the world. When he looked up, he saw everyone in the room was staring at him. "What?" he asked as he looked at them. "What do you mean what?" Nami and Usopp yelled. "You just formed an alliance with red-haired Shanks. Don't you think we need to talk about that?" Nami said, causing Luffy to chuckle. "The alliance was always there, just unofficial," Luffy said as he took a sip of his drink. "This was just to make it official and announce it to the world," he added before he took a few bites of his food. "What do you mean announce it to the world?" Zoro asked as he looked at his captain. "The two of you were talking over the phone and the only ones who know are in this room," he said, causing Luffy and Robin to chuckle. "So naive, Mr. Swordsman," Robin said with a chuckle. "The government and the Navy intercepted that call without a shadow of a doubt," she said while Luffy nodded. "She's right," Luffy said, agreeing with his newest recruit. "Due to that call being on an unsecured line, it was likely intercepted. It will be front-page news tomorrow for sure," he said, causing all of their eyes to widen. "That, however, does cause a problem," he added, puzzling them. "What problem?" Sanji asked. "It means we aren't going to be able to stay in this county as long as I would have liked," he said, causing Vivi to look at him with a slightly sad look on her face. "What do you mean, Luffy?" Nezuko asked. "The Navy isn't going to just sit back and let me and Shanks form an alliance. It will throw the three powers slightly off balance," he said, causing the king to not understand. "So, they will try to break this alliance up before it picks up steam, and they are going to go after the weakest link in the alliance, which in this case is us," he said, scaring Usopp and Chopper. "What are we going to do?" asked a very scared Usopp. Luffy's expressing changed onto a serious once before he replied. "All of you are going to get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow bright and early we are begin making our way towards the ship," he said, causing the princess to gasp. Do you guys have to leave so soon?" Vivi asked as the water began to build up in her eyes. "Yeah, this entire country will be crawling with marines by tomorrow morning," Luffy said as he looked at the princess. "It will be better if we deal with them out at sea rather than drag this country into further conflict, especially after it just came out of one," he said, causing his crew to agree. "But, my coming-of-age ceremony is in a couple of days," Viv said with tears in her eyes. "I wanted you guys to be there," she said, causing everyone to look at her with a sympathetic look on their faces. "Sorry, princess," Luffy said as he looked at the princess. "Hate to stay, we simply can't," he said before taking a sip of his whiskey. "And you can come with us either," he added, causing everyone's eyes to widen as he turned and looked at the princess. "How did you?" he said as she looked down at her lap and clenched her fist. "Anyone who knows you could see you were thinking about," Luffy said with a smirk. "The fact of the matter is, I don't need a princess on my ship," he said, causing everyone to look at him with eyes the size of dinner plates. Everyone in the room had one thought in common. "How can you be so heartless?" everyone thought as they stared at Luffy. "I, however, do have the need for a princess to oversee my operations here in Alabasta," he said with a smile, causing Vivi to look up at him with hope shining bright in her eyes. "You mean I will get to be a part of your crew?" she asked in an optimistic voice. Luffy looked at strangely with one eyebrow in the air before he replied. "I was under the impression that you already were a part of my crew," he said before he held up his hand and pulled up his sleeve slightly revealing an X. When Vivi saw it, her eyes widened before tears began streaming down her face. The entire crew looked at her with a smile on their face as they too raised up their arms, showing off their marks of friendship. "All you get a good night's sleep," Luffy said as he brought his arm down. "We leave before sunrise," he said, causing them to nod their heads. End of flashback asterisk. "I understand," Cobra said as he folded his arms. "When will that contractor be arriving?" he asked. "I will contact him once we set sail," Luffy replied as he looked over at the king. "It shouldn't take him more than a few days to arrive here," he added with a nod. Luffy then turned his attention to Zoro and the guys who were loading the last and final crate onto the ship. "We are all set here, Captain," Zoro shouted down at Luffy, causing him to nod his head in acknowledgement. "Well then, I guess it is time to set sail," Luffy said with a smile. Even though he was slightly disappointed that he had to leave Alabasta so soon, he was excited to see what the next island had in store for them. "All right, everybody," Luffy said in a commanding tone, getting everyone's attention. "Prepare to set sail," he said, causing his entire crew to nod before the ones who were still on shore began making their way towards the ship. Luffy turned towards the king and extended his hand before he spoke again. "It was a pleasure to meet you, Cobra," Luffy said as the king took Luffy's hand and shook it. "I cannot thank you enough for what you and your crew did for our country," the king said with a grateful smile as he shook Luffy's hands. Luffy just smiled and nodded before he let go of the king's hand and turned around to go to his ship. As he turned around, he came face to face with a smiling princess with tears in her eyes. "Captain," Vivi said, trying to hold back the sobs. "Princess," Luffy replied with a smirk. "As a member of my crew in this country, your first order of action is to oversee the building of my port and give me a call when it is finished," Luffy said as he looked down at the princess. "Aye," Vivi replied with a salute as the tears began to stream down her face. "Do take care of yourself, Prin," Luffy began before he was cut off by Vivi throwing herself into Luffy and hugging him. Luffy froze the moment she latched onto him. "I'm going to miss you guys," the princess said between sobs. "You do know I'm coming back here when the port is finished, right?" Luffy asked as he looked down at the princess. She peeked up at him with teary eyes before she spoke in a soft voice. "You're coming back?" she asked. "Yeah, I need to see if the port is to my exact specifications," Luffy said. Vivi was about to say something, but before she could, Nami shouted at Luffy, getting his attention. "Luffy!" Nami shouted. "Marines!" she yelled while pointing up the Sandora River, causing Luffy's face to take on a serious look before he broke free of Vivi's grasp. "Raise the anchor and release the sails," Luffy shouted before he turned his body to lightning and teleported on board the ship, leaving a very worried Vivi behind. The sails of the ship came down and caught the wind the same time Luffy arrived on board the ship. Luffy immediately walked to the front of the ship to see who their enemy was and how many of them there were. When he got to the front of the ship, he saw two standard Navy ships heading towards them, causing him to narrow his eyes in suspicion. "What are your orders, Captain?" Zoro asked as he walked up and stood beside Luffy. "Usopp, head below deck and man the cannon in the front of the ship," Luffy ordered, causing Usopp to nod before running below deck. "Chopper, man the rudder. Nami and Robin, head below deck and man the cannons on the port and starboard sides of the ship," ordered, causing the three of them to nod and head to their stations. "Nijiko, head to the rear and defend. Zoro, port side. Sanji, starboard. I'll handle the front," he said, causing them to nod and began making their way towards their specified locations on the ship. Luffy then walked forward and stood on the figurehead of the Going Merry. "Monkey D. Luffy," a marine captain said through a transponder snail hooked up to speakers. "You're to surrender and come with quietly," he said in a voice filled with arrogance. Luffy looked at the marine captain on the before he started to chuckle maniacally as he unsheathed his sword. "I refuse," Luffy said with a murderous look on his face, sending shivers down the spines of the marines there except for the captain, who was too arrogant. "Then die," the captain said before he gave a signal that was followed by the sound cannon fire. 6 cannonballs were from the cannons located in the front of the marine ships heading straight for the Going Merry. Luffy covered his sword in lighting and gave one horizontal slash, sending a horizontal wave of lightning right at the 6 incoming cannonballs. As the lightning wave encountered cannonballs, all 6 of them exploded mid-air. "Was that it?" Luffy asked in an emotionless tone as he tilted his head to the side. The marine captain stared at Luffy with a shocked expression on his face. He had heard stories of the famed Thunder Demon, but he never believed any of them. He only chopped it up to people exaggerating the stories, like the story of Luffy making an entire marine base island disappear in the East Blue. He may be new to the Grand Line, but there was no way a man can do something like that. "If that was it, allow me to show just what my crew is made of," Luffy said in a deadly tone before looking over his shoulder at his crew. "Chopper, take us right between those two," Luffy ordered, causing the reindeer to nod and began steering the ship in the direction right between the 2 marine ships. "Do you honestly think we will let you pass?" the arrogant captain yelled out at Luffy. "You will feel the wrath of absolute justice," he yelled out. "I wasn't asking for your permission," Luffy replied coldly as the Going Merry sailed in between the 2 ships. "Fire all cannons," Luffy and the Marine captain shouted at the same time, cause all three ships to unload a volley of cannonballs aimed at each other. Even though the two Marine ships had the Straw Hats outnumbered in terms of cannons and cannonballs, they were still the ones taking more damage than the Straw Hats. Thanks to efforts of Sanji, Zoro, and Nijiko, majority of the cannonballs that were headed for the Going Merry were either destroyed or sent back to the Marine ships from which they came from. A few cannonballs did manage to get past the trio and hit the Merry, but compared to the Marine ships the damage was minuscule. Luffy didn't move a muscle. He let his crew attack and defend the ship during the entire exchange of cannon fire while he just looked on. After about 1 minute of non-stop cannon fire exchange, the two Marine ships ceased firing, causing the Straw Hats to pause their assault. The two Marine ships were in shambles. Their masts there were multiple holes in the sides of both ships, dead and injured Marines scattered throughout the vessels, and a large amount of both ships was on fire. There were only a few Marines left standing after the assault. Those who were standing were bleeding and badly injured. Well, so much for absolute justice. Luffy mocked with a chuckle as he looked at the two Marine ships. Any last words? He asked as he pointed his swords at the badly injured Marine captain on the ship to his right. Fuck you, the Marine captain said before coughing up some blood. How nice, Luffy said with a sadistic smirk before he raised his sword in the air and brought it down in one swift motion. As the sword came down, every one of Marine's eyes on the other ship eyes widened in shock as the Marine ships along with the arrogant Marine captain was sliced right up the middle. The two halves of the ships crashed into the water and began to sink, taking all down on board with it down to Davy Jones' locker. Luffy then turned and looked at the Marines on the other ship with cold, emotionless eyes, causing them to flinch at his glance. Light them up, he said. Aye, came the voices of Usopp, Nami, and Robin before the sounds of multiple cannon fire filled the air. The Marine ship along with Marines on board was bombarded with even more cannonballs, causing the already broken ship to finally give up and began its descent to the bottom of the Sandora River. The Going Merry then began sailing forwards up the Sandora River once more. Yay! Nami yelled from below deck. We did it, she cheered. Don't start celebrating just yet, Luffy yelled, stopping all the cheering. We are not out of the woods yet, he said as he stared up the Sandora River. There's absolutely no way that was it. That was probably the prelude to the main event that is going to happen once we get out of the Sandora River, he said in a serious tone. Do we continue going forward? Chopper asked. Yeah, it's going to happen either way, so it doesn't really make any sense to delay the confrontation, Luffy replied before he turned and looked at his crew. Reload all of the cannons and prepare for battle, he ordered, causing them to scramble around the decks. As the ship sailed up the Sandora River, the tension on board continues to rise. Usopp and Nami were beyond scared at his point, while everyone else was nervous about the upcoming confrontation. The skies above them were beginning to darken with thunderclouds, compliments of Luffy. He wouldn't admit it, but he too was slightly worried. He was not worried about himself or his crew because he knew they can take care of themselves, but he was worried about the ship that they were on. The Merry had sustained a fair amount of damage in their previous encounter with Marines. He was not sure it would make it out of a second encounter with a stronger force. As the Merry exited the Sandora River, Luffy looked around for their foe, but much to his surprise there was no one there. Instead of finding a fleet of Marines there to kill him, all he saw was the clear blue ocean. Captain? Zoro said with a confused look on his face as he looked around. Quiet, Luffy said as he narrowed his eyes. Too damn quiet, he added. I don't like this, Sanji said, causing Luffy to nod. Chopper, follow the log pose and steer us in that direction, Luffy ordered. Aye, Chopper replied before the ship began to turn and head for the next island. As they were sailing away from Alabasta, everyone kept their guard up, waiting for the attack to happen. Just as everyone was about to let their guard down and relax a bit, thinking that no attack was coming, Luffy shouted, getting all their attention. Stop the ship, he yelled out, causing Zoro to run to the front of the ship and drop the anchor. As the anchor fell into the water, the entire ship jerked forward before coming to a full stop. Why did we stop? Nijiko asked as she walked forward a bit. That's why, Luffy replied as he pointed off into the horizon. When everyone looked forward, they all saw multiple silhouettes of ships heading towards them. Usopp, line them up, Luffy said. Aye, Captain, Usopp replied before the sounds of the front cannon being aligned. Luffy stood on the figurehead staring out at the approaching ships with his captain's coat billowing in the wind and lightning flashing over him. 10 Navy battleships, Luffy said to himself. And from the looks of it, 10 vice admirals, Luffy said before he chuckled to himself. It is a fucking buster call, he said before he pulled out a glass and poured himself a drink. I think it's time I teach you government dogs that I am someone who should not be fucked with, he said before tossing his drink back. They're close enough, Captain, Usopp yelled from below deck. Blow these bastards to thy kingdom come. Luffy yelled back, causing Usopp to fire the main cannon. As the cannon fired, the entire ship jerked back, but Luffy stood there, firm in place. The cannonball traveled from the Merry and hit one of the battleships right on the 3 large cannons that it had on its bow, destroying it. Nice one, Usopp, Nojiko shouted from the rear. Yeah. Feel the might of Captain Usopp. Usopp yelled as he fired the cannon some more. Tonight, I shall bathe in the blood of my enemies. Usopp yelled, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow and look over his shoulder at the rest of his crew, only to find them looking back at him with the same expression on their faces. Die you motherfuckers, Usopp yelled out as he fired some more. All the cannonballs he fired impacted the same ships, causing it to go up in flames and sink to the bottom of the ocean. I'm a bad influence, Luffy said with a sigh as he shook his head.
Okay, Usopp, Luffy called out, causing the cannon fire to cease.
I'll handle the rest, he said. As he said that, the sound of multiple cannon fire filled the air as all 9 Navy battleships opened fire on the Going Merry. As the cannonballs drew closer and closer to the ship, Zoro, Sanji and Negico appeared by Luffy's side and began deflection cannonballs. Luffy then clasped his hands together as though he was praying, with his elbows sticking out, and began focusing on his devil fruit powered. As he did that, electric blue sparks surrounded his body and the sky started to darken with thunder booming overhead. Luffy then looked at the marine fleet with narrowed eyes before he yelled out, 13 heavenly pillars. He yelled, causing a loud thunderclap before 9 pillars of lightning to come out of the sky and strike down all 9 ships, causing them to explode. 5 seconds after the explosion, 4 more pillars of lightning came down and struck down the water of the surrounding area of the explosion, effectively killing any survivors who might have been in the water. Isn't that the same attack you used on Nelson before we entered the Grand Line? Negico asked as she stood behind Luffy and looked out at the carnage. Yeah, Luffy replied in a monotone voice before he turned around to head back to the deck. As he turned around, he saw Robin standing by the door of the cabin that leads down below deck with a shocked expression on her face. Luffy hopped off the figurehead, began walking towards the rear deck where he usually sits on his throne. As he was walking there, he spoke. Raise the anchor, he commanded, causing Zoro to nod and began pulling up the anchor. As the anchor came up, the ship began moving once more in the direction of where all the destroyed ships were. Just as Luffy was about to walk up the stairs to the rear deck, he looked over to his left and saw Robin staring at him. Why, you just, she said in a voice filled with astonishment. I told you I'll protect you, Luffy said with a smile, causing her eyes to start being filled with water.
Luffy then continued up the stairs, leaving a teary-eyed Robin behind. When he got to the rear deck, his thundercloud came down from the sky and formed his throne, causing him to smirk before he sat down and crossed his legs. He then turned his head to the side and looked out at the link through. There were broken parts of the Marines' battleships everywhere, along with a lot of bodies and body parts just floating there.
You made that look so easy, Captain, Zoro said as he sat down and leaned against the side of the ship to Luffy's right. When I'm done with all of you, you'll be able to make it look just as easy, Luffy said as he turned and looked over at Zoro. Navy HQ ***. Currently inside the office of the Fleet Admiral of the Navy was the Fleet Admiral himself, along with all 3 admirals, Vice Admiral Suru, and Vice Admiral Garp. The 6 of them were sitting in the office discussing the now open position in the Warlords. They had originally intended to offer the position to Luffy, but seeing as how he went and formed an alliance with one of the 4 emperors. This all your grandson's fault, Garp, Sengoku said as he slammed his fist down on his desk. We could have easily covered all this up, but he had to go and do an interview with the media. He shouted out with frustration present in his voice. Boo ha 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 ha. Garp laughed from the couch. That's my boy, he said with a laugh. He is just like his grandfather, Suru said as she folded her arms next to Garp. Always causing trouble, she added. Sengoku was about to add something to what she said, but before he could open his mouth to speak, a Marine officer came running through the doors shouting at the top of his lungs. Fleet Admiral, Fleet Admiral. The Marine yelled as he burst through the door. It's bad, he added with a dire look on his face. What is it? Sengoku asked in with a worried look on his face. Are we under attack? He asked. No, we just received word from the scout ship that was monitoring the buster call, he said, causing everyone in the room to get serious to listen to what he had to say. It's gone. The Thunder Demon and his crew destroyed all 10 battleships, he said, causing everyone else to widen while Garp had a slight smirk on his face. What? Akainu yelled as he sprang to his feet. Don't be ridiculous. The buster call is the absolute embodiment of absolute justice. It cannot be destroyed by some low-life pirate scum, he stated with an angry expression on his face. It's true, sir, the Marine said with a scared look on his face. All that is left of the buster call is a bunch of broken pieces of the ships, he said. How many survivors? Sengoku asked as he narrowed his eyes. The Marine officer looked up at Sengoku and gulped before he replied. None, sir, he said in a grim tone, causing Garp to lose his smirk. What? Suru asked with eyes the size of dinner plates. There were no survivors, the Marine said. When the scout ship got to the wreckage, all that was there were broken pieces of the battleships along with dead bodies and body parts, he said grimly, causing an uneasy silence to fall over the room. I guess Red Hair was right when he called him an equal, Aokiji said, breaking the silence. I am starting to believe that bounty we gave him isn't nowhere near as close to where it should be, Kizaru said as he held up Luffy's new wanted poster. It where it needs to be, Sengoku said, getting all their attention. If he truly is in some way shape or form equals to red hair, then he needs a bounty the same as one of the emperors. However, he is not getting that, he said, confusing everyone in the room. I don't get it, Aokiji said as he tilted his head to the side. You just said that his bounty should be in line with the emperor's, but still we are giving him a much smaller one, he said with a confused look on his face. The last thing we need is a pirate with a bounty over 1 billion berries in paradise. It may cause weaker pirates to flock towards him wanting to join his crew, he said, causing them to understand why he was having Luffy keep the bounty they gave him. If the reports are correct, then the Angel of Death has already joined him. The last thing we need is for him to have a fleet under his control, Sengoku said as he sat down in his chair and let out a sigh. You would think that after being raised by red hair that he would be more like him, Suru said as she leaned back on the couch. But he is nothing like him, he seeks out conflict and kills with no hesitation, she added. Other than the fact that both of them like causing trouble, he is nothing like his grandfather either, Aokiji said while looking at Garp, who had on a straight face. Regardless of all that, we have bigger problems to deal with, Sengoku said as he rubbed his temple. We still have to find a replacement for Crocodile. The balance of power is no longer balanced, we need to fix this soon before all hell breaks loose, he said. That alliance between Red Hair and Straw Hat also disrupts the balance of the three powers, Kizaru stated, causing the fleet admiral to let out a tired sigh. Have the warlords arrived yet? Sengoku asked while looking at the marine officer who brought the dire news. Yes, sir, the marine replied. Very well, let's deal with Hat first then handle everything else, he said as he got up and began walking out of the room with everyone else following behind him. With Luffy ***, the Straw Hats have been sailing for about a day now since they encountered the Buster Call. Luffy was currently sitting on his throne with a glass of whiskey in his right hand and a transponder snail in his left. He was getting ready to call the contractor about the port that needs to be built in Alabasta. The rest of the crew were scattered all over the ship. Nami and Najiko were sitting behind Luffy with Robin trying to get to know her better. Zoro was sitting off the right of Luffy taking a nap while Usopp and Chopper were sitting in the front of the ship with their backs against each other. Usopp was working on improving his slingshot while Chopper was making new medicine to use. Sanji was in the kitchen putting together lunch for the crew. Luffy and told him to prepare a welcome feast for Robin, something at which the perverted cook had already planned on doing. The crew had been slightly hesitant towards Robin at first, but they all warmed up to her. Well, everyone except Zoro. He still didn't trust her, even though Luffy told him that she was alright. Luffy took a sip of whiskey before he looked at the transponder snail and picked up the speaker end that was on the top. He then dialed a number and the snail began to ring. Asterisk pori puri puru asterisk pori puri puru asterisk pori puri puru asterisk chak. Hello? A deep male voice answered. It's Asura, Luffy replied in a bored tone.
Oh, hey boss, the man replied. Grab your men and head over to Alabasta, Luffy said into the snail. Go and meet the king directly, he is expecting you, he added.
The king? The man asked through the line in a surprised voice. Why'd I need to meet a king? He asked, not really liking the idea of dealing with a bunch of royals. Because he is going to tell you where to build the port, jackass, Luffy said in a slightly annoyed voice. You do still have the blueprints for my port, right? He asked in a dangerous tone. Oh, of course, boss, the man replied in a slightly scared voice. The design is exactly the way you wanted it, he added. Good, now get over to Alabasta and build it, Luffy ordered. The princess of the country is part of my crew, so she will be overseeing everything on my behalf, he said, surprising the man once more. You have a princess on your crew? The man asked in a slightly impressed voice. That's new, but okay then, we will head over there now, he said. Good, Luffy said before narrowing his eyes. Oh, and Kevin, he said. Yes. The man now named Kevin replied. If I hear that you or your men caused any trouble while you're there will be hell to pay, Luffy said coldly, sending shivers down Kevin's spine. Why yes boss. Kevin replied in a scared voice before Luffy hung up the phone. He then places the transponder snail in his coat and got up from his throne and began making his way towards the front of the ship. As he was about to walk down the stairs, but before he could something slightly off to the right of the ship. It was an island, a small island but an island nonetheless. An island, Luffy said loud enough for the girls to hear. An island? Nami asked as he got up and walked towards Luffy. When she got there, she looked at her log pose and looked back in the island before she spoke again. The log pose isn't pointing to it though, she said. It won't, Luffy said as Najiko and Robin came and joined him. It is too small to have its own magnetic field, he said as he stared at the island. That is just what I need, he whispered to himself, but Najiko heard him. Huh? She asked with a confused look on her face. Never mind, Luffy said before he began walking down the stairs. Change our course for that island, he commanded, getting everyone's attention. But wouldn't that mess with the log? Nami asked. No, like I just said, it is too small to have its own magnetic field. So, it won't have any effect on the log pose, he replied as he turned and looked at her. Usopp and Chopper came running from the front of the ship and headed straight to the cabin where the rudder was. The two of them then steered the ship in the direction to the small island. As they got closer to the island, they could see a small canal that went straight into the island. "Head for that canal," Luffy shouted to Usopp and Chopper. "Aye," they replied as they angled the ship to sail up the canal. By now Sanji and heard to the commotion and came outside to see what was going on. "What's going on?" he asked as he walked over and stood next to the girls. "We are stopping at this island," Nejico said, causing him to look over at the island. "Sanji, wake up Zoro," Luffy said, causing the cook to grin evilly as he began making his way up the stairs to the rear deck where Zoro was sleeping. 10 seconds later everyone heard a loud crash and cry of pain. "Wake up you ugly moss head," Sanji yelled. "Shut up you twirly eyebrow freak," Zoro shouted back. "What did you call me?" Sanji shouted. "You heard me," Zoro replied. "Both of you shut up and get down here," Nami yelled, causing the two of them to grumble and walk down the stairs. As they were sailing down the canal, they couldn't help but admire the beauty that was this island. On either side of the bank were sandy shores that led into a tropical forest. Beneath the ship was clear blue water where the crew could see fishes swimming below. "Whoa," Nami said as she looked around. "This place is beautiful," she added. "I had to agree," Luffy said with a nod as he looked around at the scenery. "Let's anchor up ahead by that big palm tree," Luffy said while pointing at the giant palm tree that was hanging over the canal. Zoro nodded and walked to the front of the ship, getting ready to drop the anchor. When the ship got just under the palm tree, Zoro dropped the anchor into the water, causing the ship to give a little jerk before it came to a stop. Usopp came out of the cabin along with Chopper, and the two of them along with Sanji and Nejico began raising the sail. "What are we going to do here, Luffy?" Nejico asked as she walked towards her captain. "We are going to spend just over a week here," he said, surprising them. "We will use the time to repair the ship," he said, causing them to look around at the damaged parts of the ship that was damaged during their altercation with the Marines. "I think I can patch her up pretty good," Usopp said with a smile as he rubbed his hand against the going merry, causing Luffy to smile. "Good, and we can also use that time for a vacation," he added, earning him a squeal from Nami. "But it will only last for one day," he added, ending Nami's celebration. "But why?" she asked with a pout. "For the never week or so you all will be training with me," he said with a sinister chuckle, causing a shiver to run down all their spines. "But for now, let's just relax," he said as he hopped up onto the side of the ship and jumped off to the shore. "We can have our lunch out there on the shore," Sanji said as he headed to the kitchen. "That looks like a good place to catch up on some reading," Robin said as she too jumped off the ship with a book in her hand. "I'm looking to soaking in some vitamin D," Nami said while Nejico nodded in agreement. "I'll help Usopp fix the Mary," Chopper said as he transformed back into his tiny form. "I'll probably just sleep," Zoro said with a shrug. Next day ***, all the Straw Hats were currently standing in front of Luffy waiting for him to explain what exactly they were going to be training in. They had all spent the previous day relaxing and enjoying the island that they were on and were really bonding together as a crew. It was nice for Robin, who was new, to see just how the crew gels together as well as getting to know them a lot better. "Alright, listen up," Luffy said, getting all their full attention. "You're going to be training in groups for the next weeks or so," he said, causing them to nod. "One group will be training in armament hockey, while the other will be training in observation hockey," he said, causing them to nod. Robin said, getting his attention. "I've heard you talk about hockey before, but I don't know what it is," she said as she looked at Luffy. "That's fine," Luffy replied. "You're going to be in the observation group. Just have one of them there explain the basics to you," he said, causing her to nod. "Okay," she replied with a smile. "Good," Luffy said as he adjusted his straw hat. "Zoro, Sanji, and Nejico will be training with to better learn armament, seeing as how they are the only ones who unlocked it already," he said, causing the three of them to nod their head in agreement. "The rest of you will train your observation hockey together," he said, causing the rest of the crew to nod their head. "Are still using the blindfolds?" Usopp asked as he rubbed his head. "Yes, until you have that part down you can't move on to the next step," Luffy said, causing them observation group to groan. "Don't worry, that is only for half of the time we are here," he said, causing them to perk up. "Halfway through the training, the two groups will switch. The ones now doing armament will work on observation and the ones doing observation will work on unlocking their armament," he said, causing them to nod. "How exactly are we going to be training our armament?" Zoro asked with a curious look on his face, causing Luffy to grin. "The three of you are going to fight me," he said, causing their eyes to widen. "Armament is only improved through battle. So instead of you three going to battle, you're going to war instead," he said with a grin, causing them to regret every life decision that led them to this point. "I got a question?" Nejico asked, causing Luffy to nod at her. "You had said that some people can train their observation hockey so much that they could see slightly into the future, right?" she asked, causing Luffy to nod once more. "Then what about armament? Does it have some advanced form?" she asked, causing Luffy to smile and walk over to a nearby tree. "It does," he said as he placed his hand on the tree. His hand turned back like it normally does when he uses armament hockey. The next thing that happened intrigued the Straw Hats. Around his hand, a crimson aura began to form. The aura then began moving into the tree, and a few seconds later the tree exploded from the inside out. It allows you to use your haki to reach inside the target's body and destroy them from within, he said, causing their eyes to widen. Whoa, Usopp said as he looked on in amazement. So cool, Chopper squealed with stars in his eyes, causing Luffy to chuckle. I had the exact reaction, he said as he walked towards them. But do not focus on that now, he said, getting their attention. I will take a few years of training to reach that level, he said, causing a few of them to look downcast while some had a determined look on their faces, like Zoro. That sucks, Nami said with a pout, causing Luffy to chuckle. Well now, let's start training, he said with a grin. Chapter 29. Mocktown and Marshall D. Teach. The Straw Hats stayed on the tropical island for 2 weeks. They had been put through a hardcore training program, compliments of Luffy. One once beautiful island that they were on 2 weeks ago now looked like a wasteland. There were clouds of smoke rising from different parts of the island, and the once luscious tropical forest was now nothing but a pile of ash. The Straw Hats completely destroyed the island in the past 2 weeks, but if you asked Luffy, he would say it was all worth it. The 2 weeks of training paid off nicely for the crew. He can now say that everyone on his crew has unlocked both observation and armament haki, but only a handful of them can control it. Zoro, Sanji, and Negico are now aware that they possess armament haki and can summon it to some extent. Sometimes they can summon it when they wish, and sometimes they don't. Zoro and Negico seem to favor armament over observation haki, while Sanji seems to favor observation. He was quite disappointed when Luffy told him that he seems to be more talented with observation haki, but Luffy reminded him that he can still learn both. Chopper also showed signs that armament will be his specialty along with Robin, while Usopp and Nami seem to favor observation haki. It is still too early for Luffy to tell just how they are going to use their designated types of haki, but they were on the right track. Everyone was currently standing on the main deck of the ship staring at the wasteland that they were about to leave behind. Man, I can't believe that this place used to be a beautiful island 2 weeks ago, Nami said as he looked at the smoking island. It'll fix itself, Luffy said as he stared at the island. Nature always finds a way, he added. Captain is right, said Robin with a nod. The ashes will rejuvenate the soil and the beauty will return even better than it once was, she added. Anyway, Luffy said as he turned to leave. Raise the anchor and release the sails. It is time we get on our way, he said, causing all of them to nod head before they started scrambling around the ship. As the ship began to sail up the canal and away from the island, Luffy took a seat on his throne and poured himself a glass of whiskey before he let out a comforting sigh and leaned back into the cloud. Once the ship was on its way, the entire crew scattered themselves around the ship. Zoro and Negico were training themselves at the front of the ship. Nami was inside of her room drawing a map of the island that they were previously on. Sanji was in the kitchen packing away some supplies they had gathered from the island before they destroyed it. Usopp was sitting behind Luffy working with some form of explosives, while Chopper and Robin were on the main deck relaxing with a good book. Luffy found the relationship between Robin and Chopper very amusing, especially when Robin first tried to speak to the small reindeer doctor. It took some time for Chopper to warm up to her, but once he did, the two of them were somewhat inseparable. Hopefully nothing but smooth sailing from here on, Luffy said as he transformed his throne into a lawn chair and pulled his straw hat over his face. Nami, you're in charge, he shouted as he closed his eyes. Nami, who was inside, came outside to see why her captain put her in charge. When he went to the rear deck, she saw him laying on a lawn chair made of clouds with his hat over his face. She said with a smile before checking the log pose on her wrist. The Moby **** the Moby, the flagship of the strongest man in the world, Edward Newgate, or more commonly known as Whitebeard. Whitebeard was currently sitting on the rather large throne with a barrel of sake in his hand while hooked up to a bunch of medical equipment. He had his crew scattered all around the giant ship, while most of them were mainly surrounding where he was sitting. Oi Pops, came the shout of someone walking towards the giant of a man. Marco, you're back, Whitebeard said as he looked at his second-in-command who was walking towards him holding 2 newspaper. Did you get everything? He asked.
Yeah, we got everything, Marco replied with a nod. Did you read the newspaper for the past 2 weeks? He asked as he looked up at his captain. No, the news crew haven't come this way yet, Whitebeard replied before he narrowed his eyes and looked at Marco. Why? He asked. That's strange considering that some world-shaking news happened over the past 2 weeks, he said, getting the entire crew's attention. Here, see for yourself, he said as he handed him the 2 newspaper. Whitebeard placed the barrel of sake down and grabbed the 2 newspaper before he began to read. The first one talked about Luffy defeating Crocodile in the interview he gave right after it. That boy is already causing trouble, Whitebeard said with a chuckle. Just wait till you see the second paper, Marco said with a smirk. The old man placed the first paper down after reading it and then picked up the second only to have his eyes widen at the headlines. Just what are brought up to, Whitebeard said to himself. What is it, Pops? Asked a random crew member. Red Hair and Luffy formed an alliance, Marco said, allowing the old man to continue to read. The older members of the crew, like the commanders, were surprised when they heard that, while the newer members were puzzled. What's so bad about that? One of them asked, causing Marco to chuckle. If you knew Luffy, you would know that he can match one of the 4 emperors in terms of power, Marco said, surprising them. This alliance is basically an alliance between 2 emperors, he added. It says here that Shanks calls him an equal, Whitebeard said, causing Marco to nod. Yeah, that's the thing that is throwing everyone into a fit, Marco said with a sigh. A lot of people in the government is nervous about this alliance, he added with a slightly worried look on his face. They should be, the old man said ominously. By the way, did you hear any news about that wayward son of mine? He asked as he folded the paper. Yeah, both of them are in paradise, Marco replied. Toto land. Mama. Big news, shouted Montdor as he ran into the queen's chambers with 2 newspaper in his hands.
Why are you shouting? Big Mom asked as she looked down at her son. Inside the chamber with Big Mom were the 3 sweet commanders, the first son of the Big Mom pirates, Parasparrow, and the 8th daughter of the Charlotte family, Brûlé. Yes, please stop shouting, the only female sweet commander, Smoothie said. That is interesting news, Katakuri said coolly, causing everyone to look over at him. Would you cut that out? The last of the 3 sweet commanders, Snack yelled. All of you be quiet, Big Mom said, shutting everyone up. What is the news that got you so excited? She asked while looking at Montdor. It is about Red Hair, he replied, earning everyone's attention. He formed an alliance, he said, surprising everyone. He did what? Asked, yelled Big Mom. With who? She screamed. With a new rookie pirate, Montdor said in a scared voice. The Thunder Demon, Straw Hat Luffy, he added. Give me that, Big Mom said before she snatched the paper from him. I asked that brat to join me a long time ago and he turned me down, and now he has the nerve to join someone else, she said angrily as she read through the paper. You asked Straw Hat Luffy to join our crew? Parasparrow asked as Age looked at his mother. Not that rookie, she screamed. I'm talking about Shanks, she said before continuing to read the paper. Who is this rookie anyway? She asked. Apparently he is Red Hair's apprentice, Smoothie said. She had heard stories of the new rookie that was causing trouble in paradise, but she never thought that he would be stirring up this much trouble. There are some rumors going around that the Navy sent a buster call to kill the rookie after the story broke about the alliance, Montdor said as he looked around at his siblings. And, asked Snack as he looked at him to continue. All 10 Navy battleships were completely destroyed by Straw Hat Luffy, he replied. If anyone in the room was surprised by that information, none of them showed it. His equal? Big Mom said to herself as she read through the paper. Yeah, apparently Shanks called the rookie his equal, Montdor said, causing a surprised reaction to spread across the room. That's surprising, Smoothing said. Mama. Big Mom laughed as she folded the paper. Let me know when this brat enters the new world. I'll give him a nice welcome, she said with a sadistic look on her face that made no one wanted to tell her that Luffy already spent time in the new world. Wano Country *, Lord Kaido. Lord Kaido, yelled a random member of the Beast Pirates as he ran down the halls of Kaido's mansion in Onigashima. Why are you yelling? Asked a male voice off to the right. When the Beast Pirate looked over, he saw 2 men sitting by a wooden table staring at him. Lord King. Lord Queen. The man said as he looked at 2 of Kaido's second-in-command. Where's Lord Kaido? There's major news, he said as he ran up to them and handed them a newspaper. Let's see, King said as he took the paper and read its contents. The captain is drunk, and this doesn't concern us, King said as he tossed the paper on the table. That was quick, Queen said as he picked up the paper to see what was on it. When he saw the headline, he too discarded it. I agree, this doesn't concern us, he said while King nodded. When the captain is sober, we'll tell him, King said to the lower-ranking member of the Beast Pirates. Back with Luffy ***, it had been 2 days since the Straw Hats left the island. It had been nothing but smooth sailing for the entire journey since. They had a few encounters with the Marines and a few pirates which the crew easily took care of and helped themselves to their cargo. Other than that, the crew was enjoying their moment of relaxation. Luffy was currently standing on the rear deck of the Going Merry looking out at the clear blue sea. The rest of the crew were scattered throughout the ship doing their own thing. It was at this point in time where something fell from the sky and hit Luffy's straw hat, getting his attention. Huh? He said as he looked at where the object fell and saw that it was a piece of wood. If that rain? He heard Zoro asked as more pieces of wood began to fall. No way, this isn't rain, Sanji said before everyone decided to look up. When they all looked up, they all saw something that shocked them to their core. Well, that is interesting, Luffy said as saw what looks to be parts of a ship falling from the sky. It looks like a... Oh shit, he said as he stared at the giant galleon falling from the sky. Huh? The entire crew including said as they stared at the falling ship that was on a set course to fall pretty close to the Mary. Ah! Everyone yelled out as the ship got closer and closer to the surface of the water. Luff, do something. Nezuko yelled as she dodges the falling debris. What am I supposed to do with that? Luffy yelled back, genuinely not knowing what to do. He could slice it in half, but that may do more bad than good. He could also blow it up, but the same outcome will befall them. Ah! They continued to yell as the galleon crashed into the water just behind the Going Merry, causing really big waves to form. The Going Merry began to be tossed in all different directions by the waves. Hold on to something. Zoro yelled as he held onto the rails of the rear deck. And whatever you do not let go, he added in a panicked voice. Why are there ships falling out of the sky? Nami asked as she held onto the mast. I have no idea, Luffy replied as he used his lightning to anchor himself to the ground. Heads up, I don't think the party is over yet, Sanji yelled as he looked to the sky and saw that there was more debris falling. It won't stop falling, he cried. The rudder, turn the rudder, Nami yelled as he looked at Zoro. They'll never work in these waves, Zoro yelled back. Luffy, you have to protect the ship. She's taking a beating, he yelled as he looked at his captain. Right, Luffy said with a nod before he turned and looked upwards with an emotionless look on his face. He then reared his right fist back and aimed it up at the sky before he shouted out. El Thor! He yelled as the punches straight up into the air at the falling debris. Out of his hand came a massive lightning stream that shot straight up into the sky, burning away debris that would fall onto the ship. The giant stream of lightning produced a bright white light that could be seen from miles on the open ocean. It took about 5 minutes for the remaining debris to stop falling, but once it did, the entire crew stood on the main deck trying to process what had just occurred.
Someone wants to explain to me why a freaking ship just fell out of the sky. Nami asked as she looked around at everyone before her yes locked onto Luffy. Don't look at me, Luffy said as he held his hands up. That's strange even for the Grand Line, he added while Robin nodded in agreement. However, I wonder, he said as he trailed off and looked up at the sky.
Could there be a sky island above us? He asked himself.
Oh no, Nami yelled out in a panicked voice, knocking Luffy out of his thought.
What's wrong, Nami? Sanji asked as he looked over to their navigator.
The log pose is broken, she said as she looked at the log pose strapped to her wrist. When Luffy heard that, his head snapped around at her at amazing speed with a worried expression on his face. What? He asked as he stared at her. It's broken, she said as she held it up for him to see. It's pointing up into the sky, she said, causing Luffy to let out a sigh of relief. Oh, thank God, Luffy said in a relieved voice, causing Nami to look at him with an angry expression on her face.
Why the hell are you so relieved? She yelled as she looked at Luffy. The log pose is broken and now we are stranded here in the middle of the Grand Line. She yelled, causing Luffy to look back at her with a cold expression on his face, causing her to flinch slightly. First off, the log pose isn't broken, he said, surprising her. And secondly, if it was broken it would have been your fault, seeing as how you were the navigator of this ship, he added coldly. Mr. Captain is right, Robin said, trying to take the attention away from Luffy and Nami. The log pose isn't broken, it is simply registering an island with a strong magnetic pull and its needle is reflecting that, she said, causing all of them to look at her strangely. If the needle is pointing towards the sky, then it must mean, she trailed off as she looked up to the sky. You're right, Luffy said, getting all their attention. It's pointing to a sky island, he said, causing their eyes to widen. They exist? Robin asked, to which Luffy replied with a nod. I had only heard stories about them. I never thought they actually exist, she said in an astonished voice as she looked up to the sky. Don't be ridiculous, Nojiko said as she looked between Luffy and Robin. There can't be islands in the sky, she said, causing Luffy and Robin to chuckle. There you all go again, trying to use logic to explain the Grand Line, Luffy said as he stared at his crew. There isn't just an island above us, but an entire ocean, he said, surprising them. No way, Nami said as she looked up. I'm still confused, Sanji added, causing Luffy to chuckle. You all rode on my thundercloud before, I don't see why this is so hard for you to believe, he said with a chuckle. Do you know which sky island is above us? Usopp asked. No, they constantly move so it is impossible to tell, Luffy replied before a smile crept on his face. It looks like our next stop is Sky Island, he said as he raised his voice slightly. Yeah, Usopp and Chopper yelled out in excitement. How do we get there? Chopper asked, causing the smile to vanish from Luffy's face. There are 2 WBER, he said as he began to think. One of them is going up the summit of High West, but that will probably result in a few of us dying, he said, casually, causing everyone on his crew go pale. The other way is by the knock upstream, that way is much safer, he said, causing them to let out a sigh of relief. Where is this knock upstream? Nami asked while looking at Luffy. I have no idea, he replied with a shrug, causing all of them to comically fall over. How don't you know? All of them yelled, asked at the same time, causing to shrug his shoulders before he replied. I usually just fly up to that level, he replied. Then just fly us up there, Zoro said, causing everyone to nod. First off, that's cheating, he said, causing them to sweat drop. Secondly, I can't lift the whole damn ship. Who do I look like, Whitebeard? He asked rhetorically. So how are we going to get there? Nami asked, causing Luffy to place his finger on his chin as he began to think. His eyes darted around looking for something that will give a clue as to how they can find the knock upstream. I got it, he said as his eyes landed on the wreckage of the sinking ship that was slowly sinking to the bottom of the ocean. We will search the wreckage as much as we can before it sunk to the bottom of the ocean for clues, he said while pointing to the sinking ship. That makes sense, Robin said with a nod. The ship doesn't appear to be a pirate ship, so we should look for a captain's log or so, she said while Luffy nodded his head in agreement. Well, what are you waiting for? Luffy asked as he looked at his crew.
If you didn't eat a devil fruit, get out there and look, he ordered, causing them to scramble to the sinking ship. Nami huffed and grumbled as she walked towards the edge of the Going Merry. Who knows, there may even be some treasure on board, Luffy said with a smirk as he stared at Nami. As soon as she heard that, he jumped off the ship and began swimming towards the wreckage. The only people left on board the ship was Luffy, Robin, and Chopper. The three of them stood on the bow of the ship looking at the rest of the crew run across the different parts of the broken ship trying to find something that will tell them how to get to Sky Island. After 5 minutes of searching, Usopp yelled out while holding up a piece of paper.
I found a map, he shouted, getting everyone's attention. Okay everyone, get back here now. Luffy shouted to the crew. The ship is starting to sink faster now. Hurry up and get back on board before it pulls you down with it, he said, causing everyone to begin making their way back to the ship. When everyone got back, Usopp unrolled what appears to be a map for everyone to see. Look, he said as he held it up. It's a map of the Sky Island, he said, causing all of them to look at the map. It's called Skypia, Nami said as she examined the map. I've heard of it before, Luffy said, getting all their attention. I think Shanks once told me that they visited that island before, but I can't remember much, he added with a sigh.
If a big ship like that one can make it up there, then so can we, Nami said, causing Luffy to nod his head in agreement. We just need to find the records of that ship, she added, confusing some of the crew.
But the ship is at the bottom of the ocean by now, Usopp said as he folded his arms. Luffy was going to reply, but before he could, the sound of people cheering filled the air, getting everyone's attention. Salvage! Salvage the sea! The crew heard, followed by the sounds of cymbals crashing together. The entire crew paused their conversation and began looking around to see where the sound was coming from. Look over there, Nijiko said as he pointed in the distance behind the ship. When everyone looked over, they saw a silhouette of a rather large ship approaching them. Who the hell is that? Usopp asked as he brought his goggles down to try and get a better look at who was approaching them. As the ship got closer, the crew could see that it was a rather strange-looking ship. The things that caught everyone's attention was the 2 giant bananas on the side of the ship along with the giant monkey figurehead. It's a pirate ship, Nami said, causing everyone to look up at the main mast of the new ship and saw that there was in fact a Jolly Roger on the flag. Luffy just narrowed his eyes and raised his eyebrow at the strange newcomers. Is this the location where the ship sank? The voice of a man asked aboard the ship. How the hell did they know a ship sank here? Luffy asked himself. Aye, Captain sir, the crew aboard the ship replied. Prepare to raise the ship. Whatever lies on the bottom now belongs to me, the king of all salvagers and captain of the Masira pirates. Masira? A man who looked a lot like a monkey said. Great, a boat of unstable men led by an unstable monkey, Nami said with a sweat drop as she stared at the salvagers. Hey, said Masira as he took notice of the Straw Hat Pirates. What are all of you doing here? He asked as he places his hands on his waist. In case you didn't know, all these waters belong to me, he said as he stared at the crew. Careful monkey, Luffy said in a serious tone as he stared up at the monkey. Don't go raising your voice at me, he added dangerously. Just who do you think you are to talk to the king of salvagers like that? Masira asked as he prepared to attack. Luffy was about to respond, but before he could, someone on Masira's crew spoke before he could. Sir, that's the Jolly Roger of the Straw Hat Pirates, a random member of the monkey's crew. That's the Thunder Demon's ship. He yelled out, causing other members of the Masira pirates to begin murmuring amongst themselves. It's really him, the one who defeated one of the 7 warlords of the sea, Luffy heard someone say. When Masira realized who Luffy is, he immediately took a step back and began to sweat slightly. What are you doing here? Masira asked in a scared voice. Relax, Luffy said with a sigh. We were just going to search the wreckage for any information about the knock-up stream, he said as he looked up at the monkey. But seeing as you and your crew and professional salvagers, I'll pay you for any information that you find down there, he added. There is no need for that, Masira said as before reached into his pocket and pulled out an eternal pose. I know someone who can tell you all about getting to Sky Island, he said as he held it up for Luffy to see. And what do you want in return for that information? Luffy asked as he narrowed his eyes. You could buy the eternal pose off of me, Masira suggested. Sounds good to me, Luffy said as he reached into his coat and pulled out a small bag of money. 5,000 berries, he added as he held up the bag. Works for me, Masira said before the two of them tossed their respective items to each other. Luffy caught it and looked at the pose and saw the name, Jaya, painted on at the bottom. Jaya? He asked as he looked back up at the monkey. Yeah, just head over there and talk to a man named Mont Blanc Cricket, Masira said with a nod. He is an expert on the subject, he added, surprising Luffy. Alright then, Luffy said before he handed the eternal pose over to Nami. Set our course to Jaya, he commanded. The ship began sailing away from the salvagers in the direction of Jaya. Luffy, Nami said, getting her captain's attention. If we go to Jaya, wouldn't that mess with our log pose? She asked as she held up her wrist for Luffy to see. That's how it normally works, but it shouldn't register the island's magnetic field as soon as we get there, he said before he took a sip of his whiskey. All we need to do is leave before it gets a chance to register it, he said, causing her to nod. Doesn't sound that hard, Usopp said from behind Luffy. Let's hope so, Robin said as she leaned against the side of the ship. It had been 5 minutes since the crew left the salvagers when the sun suddenly disappeared from the sky and was replaced with darkness. Enji yelled as darkness fell onto them. Where did the sun go? Asked a scared Chopper. Well, this is certainly strange, Luffy said calmly as he sipped his whiskey. You Captain? Zoro said in a slightly scared voice as he looked behind Luffy. What is it? Luffy asked with a curious look on his face as he looked at his first mate. Zoro, who was sweating a lot, slowly raised his hand in the air and pointed up to the skies behind the Going Merry. Seeing his first mate so scared, Luffy sprang to his feet, dropping his glass of whiskey, and looked behind him with the others following his lead. They all saw absolutely terrified, each of them. It even scared Luffy a bit. What the actual fuck? Luffy said in a whisper as he stared at the sight before him. Standing there in the distance behind the ship were 3 giant shadows that seemed to be taller than the skies itself. Sea monsters, the entire crew yelled before all of them, including Luffy, ran to the main deck and grabbed the oars and began rowing as fast and hard as they could, sending the Going Merry dashing forward at blind speed away from the giant creatures. The Merry went dashing through the waves, ignoring the wind direction and currents. The crew never stopped rowing until the Merry came flying out into the light once more. As soon as the slide hit the ship, everyone stopped rowing and slumped over on the deck, heavily sweating from the ordeal they just suffered. What the hell was that? Nami asked as she fell on all fours. I have no explanation, Luffy said as he fell on his butt and leaned against the mast. If those were giants, then they are clearly bigger than any giant I have ever seen, he said as he reached into his coat and pulled out a new glass and bottle of whiskey. Those things were as big as the red line, Nijiko said as she too fell on her butt. They had wings, Usopp said, getting all their attention. What? Zoro asked as he looked at Usopp. They had wings on their back, Usopp replied, getting Luffy's attention. Of course, Luffy said with a smile, getting all their attention. How could I not realize it earlier, he said before taking a sip of his drink. Realize what? Nijiko asked as she stared at her captain. Those weren't monsters, Luffy said, surprising all of them. Those were people on Sky Island, he said, causing all their eyes to widen. It is their shadows from that high up that makes it appears as monsters from below, he added. That makes sense, Robin sighed as he stood up to her feet. All would be required is a strong source of light and a surface large enough to cast the shadow, she said while Luffy nodded. The clouds that high up should provide the surface needed to cast a shadow that big, she added. So those weren't any sea monster? Asked a still very scared Chopper. No, just regular-sized people really high up, Luffy replied as he stood up and patted the little reindeer on the head. For now, just forget about it, he said as he began making his way to the rear deck where he left his throne. Continue our course to Jaya, he added before he disappeared into the rear deck. I wonder what this Jaya place is like, Chopper asked as he walked around the deck. I hope it's relaxing, he added. 3 hours later, it had been 3 hours since the crew got the eternal pose to Jaya. It had been smooth sailing for them since then. Luffy was sitting on the figurehead of the ship with Chopper right behind him on the bow, relaxing in the sun. Usopp was sitting up in the crow's nest with a pair of binoculars, looking out, trying to spot Jaya. Do you see anything, Usopp? Chopper asked from the front of the ship. No, I don't see anything, just the sky and the sea, Usopp replied as he looked through the binoculars. I thought that Jaya Island wasn't too far from where we were, Zoro said as he looked around. It isn't, Nami replied as she too looked around. We should have spotted the coastline of Jaya an hour ago, she said. Don't worry about it, Luffy said in a relaxed tone as he looked up to the sky. Just relax and take in this beautiful weather we are having, he said. Spring weather is the best, Chopper said, agreeing with Luffy. Even the seagulls are enjoying it, he said as he looked up at 3 seagulls flying overhead. Suddenly out of nowhere the 3 seagulls dropped on the deck in front of Chopper, dead. Ah! They've been shot! Chopper screamed, getting everyone's attention before he ran towards the seagulls. I don't think they could have been shot, Chopper, Usopp said from up in the crow's nest. I didn't hear any gunfire, he added. Luffy stared at the 3 seagulls through narrowed eyes before he looked around into the distance surrounding the ship for an enemy. I found a bullet, Chopper yelled as he pulled a bullet out from on the birds. And judging from the trajectory it came from over there, he said while pointing to the front of the ship. You're telling me someone shot those birds from an island we can't even see as yet? Nami asked rhetorically. That's impossible, Chopper, she added. But I saw it happen, Chopper whined. Luffy just narrowed his eyes and placed his guard up. They sailed for another hour before the island finally came into view. Wow, this place looks like a resort, Usopp said as he stood next to Luffy and Chopper and stared at the approaching island. It sure does, Chopper agreed in an excited tone. Luffy just stood there and narrowed his eyes at the multiple ships that were docked there. Either I'm seeing things or the harbor over there is filled with pirate ships, he said, causing all of them to look over at the harbor. Don't be silly, Captain, Nami said as he walked up to Luffy. Pirates can't dock their ships without being run out of town soon after, she said. Nope, those are pirate ships, Nezuko said to her sister. Sounds like this town is going to be a lot of fun, Zoro said with a smirk. As the Going Merry sailed closer and closer to the harbor, for the island people on the docks and near the coast took notice the ship as well as the Jolly Roger painted on its sails. Hey, look over there, a random person said while pointing out to the Merry. Isn't that the symbol of the Straw Hat Pirates? He said, getting the attention of a lot more people. It is, some else said as they stared at the approaching ship. That's the Thunder Demon's ship, he yelled. Luffy heard all this but kept a stoic expression on his face. As the ship docked at the harbor, there was a crowd there wanting to see the Thunder Demon himself, while some wanted to challenge the man who formed an alliance with one of the 4 emperors. Luffy turned around and began walking towards the main deck to disembark the ship. As he was walking, he yelled out orders to his crew. Zoro and Robin, come with me ashore, he said, causing the 2 of them to nod their heads and follow him. The rest of you stay on board and guard the ship, he said before he jumped up onto the side of the ship. If any of these fools are stupid enough to attach my ship or my crew, send them in this harbor to the bottom of the ocean, he said coldly as he stared at the crowd that was waiting for them on the docks. Luffy, Zoro, and Robin then hopped off the Going Merry and landed in front of a crowd of pirates who were all looking at him with hungry eyes. Luffy just turned and stared at all of them with the cold eyes of a killer before he sent out a wave of conqueror's haki, knocking out everyone on that dock. He then adjusted his straw hat and started walking towards the town as the bodies of pirates collapsed in front of him. He had Zoro on his right and Robin on his left, and 3 of them had an emotionless look on their face as they walked through the piles of unconscious pirates laying at their feet. He took them all out without even moving, a random pirate on the shoreline said in fear as he stared at the 3 straw hats that were approaching. He's a demon, another said. Luffy and his 2 crew members didn't even bat an eye at the people who were still awake and saw they kept on walking. The trio continued walking through the town, taking in the sight of pirates fighting and drinking everywhere they turned. All 3 of them came to a sudden stop in the middle of the road and looked to their left as though they were waiting for something. Sure enough, 1 second later a man came bursting through the walls of the building to their right and flying right past the trio. It was thanks to their observation haki that they avoided being hit by the flying man. As the man flew past them, Luffy stuck out his left hand and caught a piece of wood that would have hit Robin in the head before he turned to his left and stared at a pirate who obviously sent the man flying in the first place. You almost hit the pretty lady, Luffy said coldly as he stared at the man. The pirate stared at Luffy with eyes the size of dinner plates as he recognized who Luffy was. Why you're the, he began but was cut off by Luffy throwing the piece of wood back at blinding speed, sticking him right in the head like a dart. The pirate then fell face forward onto the ground, sending the piece of wood further into his head until it stuck out of the back of his head. Damn, Zoro said as he stared at the now dead man. Luffy didn't say anything, he just continued walking. As they walked a little further, they found themselves stopping once more. This time it was an old man that fell in front of them. Whoa, he's messed up, Robin said as she stared at the man.
Looks like he fell off his horse, Luffy said while pointing to the white horse standing next to the man. That's got to hurt, Zoro said as he stared down at the man. Hey, sorry to bother you, but could you help me up? The old man said in a sickly tone, causing Luffy to raise an eyebrow. What, not in the mood to help yourself up? Zoro asked rhetorically. The old man just looked up at the 3 of them with a pained look on his face, causing the swordsman to sigh. Luffy, give me a hand, Zoro said with a sigh as he walked forward. Sure, Luffy with a shrug as he walked up to the old man with Zoro. The 2 of them picked up the old man and tossed him back up onto his horse. Hey, would you look at that, I'm back on my horse, the old man said with a smile. I was a sickly child growing up and never got better, he said before he looked at his horse. Now let's go, stronger, he said to the horse. The horse took 1 step forward before it too collapsed face first. We should put these 2 out of their misery, Zoro suggested before him and Luffy picked the horse up. Thanks again, pal, the man said before he pulled out a basket of apple. You know, I don't have enough money these days for a reward. Would you care for an apple? He asked as he held up the basket with a bunch of red apples. Do we look like idiots to you? Luffy said as he stared at the man on the horse. As he said that, one of the buildings behind them exploded, getting all their attention. What the hell happened? A random person on the streets asked. One of the guys took a bite from an apple they got from that freak on the horse and then exploded. A man replied in a scared voice, causing Luffy, Zoro, and Robin to turn their attention back to the man on the horse. Seems like we dodged a bullet there, Captain, Robin said with a sweet smile on her face as she stared at her captain. I guess we did, Luffy said with a chuckle before they walked past the old man and continued their way into town. After walking a bit further through the streets of this strange town, Luffy came to a sudden stop, startling Zoro and Robin. As he stopped, a loud thunder rolled overhead and the skies began to darken. Robin and Zoro didn't know what happened, but the two of them were sure of one thing. Luffy was pissed. Luffy then turned his head to the left and stared into a bar called Pub and Pies with cold eyes.
Without saying anything, he turned and pushed open the saloon-style doors and entered the bar. A silence fell onto the bar as he entered and everyone took notice of his presence. However, he didn't pay any attention to the people that were seated all over the bar. Instead, his gaze was locked onto a rather fat man sitting at the bar eating a pie. Luffy walked up the bar counter and looked at the bartender with a cold look on his face before he spoke. Get me a glass of whiskey on the rocks, Luffy said in a monotone voice, causing the fat man who was sitting to his right to freeze the moment he heard Luffy's voice. Also, get some sake for the swordsman and a glass of red wine for the lady, he said. Since he arrived at the bar counter, he hadn't looked at the man to his left even once, but his observation haki was telling him everything he needed to know.
Here you go, the bartender said as he placed the 3 drink down in front of them. They picked up their respective drinks and tossed it back. As Luffy tossed his whiskey back, the man who was sitting to his right easily got up and began to sneak away. Luffy placed his empty glass down onto the counter and spoke in a chilling voice. Going somewhere. Teach, he said as he looked over his shoulder at the fat man trying to sneak away. The man now named Teach stopped mid-step and slowly turned around to face Luffy with a slightly worried expression on his face. Hey, how's it going? Teach asked with a nervous chuckle as he began to sweat slightly. I know what you did, Teach, Luffy said as he turned around. Oh, I'm sorry. I meant I know what you did. Blackbeard, he said, causing Zoro to realize who the man in front of them was while Robin was still puzzled. Before Teach could reply to Luffy, the doors of the bar were kicked open as a group of pirates. I heard a big shot pirate came into town and put on some kind of spectacle at the harbor, said the obvious captain of that merry band of pirates. Luffy just ignored his presence and continued talking to Teach. You broke the unwritten rule aboard every pirate ship, Luffy said to Teach. You kill your fellow crew member, your friend, he said as he took a few steps towards Teach. Zoro placed his hands on his swords and kept his eyes on the group that just entered the bar just in case they tried something, while Robin chose this time to talk to the bartender to try and get some information from him. The group of pirates that just entered the bar didn't take so kindly to being ignored by a bunch of rookies. Hey, shouted the captain. I'm talking to you, he said angrily, causing Luffy and Teach to look over at him with an eyebrow raised in the air. Buzz off, kid, Luffy said while looking at the man. Can't you see the grown-ups are talking? Why don't you and your friends go play pirate somewhere else, he said before he turned his attention back to Teach. As Luffy said that, the people in the bar gasped in shock when they heard him dismiss that pirate so easily. Don't he know who that is, a random person said. That's Bellamy, the hyena, he has a 55 million berry bounty on his head, another said. Well, it should be expected, a random woman said. Straw Hat has a 200 million berry bounty on his head, so he is obviously stronger, she said, getting Zoro and Robin's attention at the mention of Luffy's bounty. Bellamy was starting to get really pissed off. First, he was ignored by the new rookie sensation, and now people are suddenly calling weak. That was the final straw. He reared his fist back, causing everything from his wrist to his elbow to turn into spring. He then shot his spring-powered fist forward straight at Luffy, who simply raised his hand and caught it with little effort. I'm not going to warn you again, brat, Luffy said as he turned and looked at a very surprised Bellamy. Beat it, he said before he let go of the fist and turned his attention back to Teach. Out of respect for old man Whitebeard, I promised not to kill you, he said to Teach, causing him to relax slightly while everyone's eyes inside the bar to widen at the mention of Whitebeard. But I didn't say anything about not kicking your ass, he added in a cold tone, causing a panicked expression crept up Onor. He could react. Luffy backhanded him, sending him flying straight through the walls of the bar. Luffy then turned around and walked back to the bar and pulled out a small bag of money and tossed it to the bartender. That should cover everything, including the damages, he said. Hey, Captain, Zoro said, getting his attention. Apparently you got a new bounty, he said as he pointed to the wall to the right of Luffy. When Luffy looked over, he saw his new wanted poster along with Zoro's. Not as much as I had expected, Luffy said as he stared at the poster. And would you look at that, you got a bounty as well. Nice, he commented before his hands suddenly shot up into the air and caught a familiar fist. You don't learn, do you? Luffy asked as he turned and looked at an angry Bellamy. Want to know a funny thing about springs? Luffy said as he stared at the pirate. They work both ways, he said before pulling on Bellamy's arm slightly, causing the pirate to come flying towards him. Luffy just angled him arm slightly, causing Bellamy's face to crash right into Luffy's elbow.
As his face impacted Luffy's elbow, he went into a slight daze. Luffy let go of his arm, grabbed him by his head. "Next time I tell you to fuck off," he said as he turned his whiskey glass over on the counter. "You fuck off," he said before he slammed Bellamy's face onto the glass and through the counter. "Bellamy!" yelled a man in a white coat and sunglasses before he pulled out 2 machetes and charged towards Luffy. Before he can get to Luffy, Zoro intercepted him and slashed him right across his face, causing him to fall over to the ground screaming and bleeding heavily. "Sorry, the captain is off limits to trash," Zoro said as he sheathes his swords. "Did you get the information we are after?" Luffy asked while looking at Robin. "Yes, the man named Cricket lives on the other side of the island," she said, causing him to nod his head. "Okay then, I'll just take care of Teach, then we can go," Luffy said as he began walking towards the direction where he sent Teach. He walked through the hole in the wall and found a pile of rubble, but no Teach. Luffy growled in frustration, causing lightning and thunder to go crazy in the skies above Jaya. "He's gone," he said in an angry voice. "Don't worry, Mr. Captain," said Robin, trying to calm Luffy down. "We'll catch up to him sooner or later, but for now we need to go find this Cricket guy before the log post registers this island's magnetic field," she said, causing Luffy to nod his head and began walking away. When the trio arrived back at the ship, Luffy didn't speak to anyone. Instead, he walked straight to his throne and sat down before he poured himself a glass of whiskey. "What's up with him?" Sanji asked while looking at Luffy. "Long story," Zoro said before he turned to Robin. "So, where are we going?" he asked. "Set our course for the other side of the island," she said to Nami. "Cricket lives there," she added, causing the navigator to nod her head. "It's all that Bellamy kid's fault," Luffy thought to himself. "The next time I see him he'll be sorry," Luffy thought as the Going Merry pulled out of port and began sailing around the island.